Hey guys, so today's video we're going to talk about training, and one of the more frequent statements that I love to hear is you're doing it wrong. And whenever I hear you're doing it wrong, whenever I hear that, someone said I was doing it wrong, I'm doing it wrong. The way I'm programmed is wrong. It's wrong for me to be training my glutes this frequently. I should only be training my glutes 1 day per week if I want to have development, because hypertrophy only happens if you have this much rest and this much recovery time, and you only should be training this frequently, yada, yada, yada. So let's just start with the fact that there is a lot of advancement in science, and there's been huge progress in that area when it comes to bodybuilding. In particular, you're going to notice that there is a lot of research in powerlifting as well, but within the bodybuilding community when it comes to glute hypertrophy, as well as any other type of hypertrophy going on. But we're going to talk about glutes today because I train mainly bikini competitors, and this comes up often where people say, you're doing it wrong because you are training your glutes too frequently. I have some clients that train their glutes 5 days per week. I have other clients that train their glutes 1 day per week. So to start out, individuality is always, always, always key. And when we talk about that, interestingly enough, the girls that I coach that can only train their lower halves 1 to 2 days per week tend to also have other stressors in their life, other environmental stressors or physical stressors such as hormonal shifting or hormonal issues, or environmental stress, as I said, which could be like home life, anything, work, whatever. Or they tend to be someone who walks all day, has a laborious job, okay? The ones that tend to be able to maintain the 3 to 5 day frequency of glute training happen to be the ones that don't work on their feet all day, the ones that aren't walking around all day, the ones that have more of a sedentary lifestyle in general. And if you think about this logically, people get like really crazy about overtraining and overdoing it, but then they're sitting all day. You're going into the gym for 1 hour or 2 hours max. Like I don't know any of my clients that train for 2 hours with weights, like an hour max, right? But you've been sitting all day. So you're sedentary all day. When you sit, we're just going to do like a little anatomy lesson here right now. When we sit, the majority of you either sit on your phone or you sit at your computer, you put your body in a place of forward flexion, which means that you have your upper body more forward. You are also in what's called forward flexion, and those glute medius muscles turn off. So your glute medius on each side gets the signal that it doesn't need to go to work, okay? So, but in a normal pattern, if you were to be moving around all day and not sitting all day, your glute medius would be activating. So you can tell me that if your glute medius gets activated in the gym after you've been sitting all day for 1 hour or even 15 minutes, because you're not going to be training your glutes through that whole hour, typically in my programming, you wouldn't be. You would still be working other body parts, not just glutes. So maybe glutes takes up 20 minutes of that 45-minute workout. Let's say it's 45 minutes, okay? And glutes is 20 minutes of that. That's not really high frequency if you sit on your butt all day and you're sedentary. Because if you were not sedentary and you were up and moving around in the world, your glutes would be activated all day long, right? So let's keep that in mind as one thing. The second thing to recognize about glute training, because we're going to talk about glutes here, is success leaves clues. So we always want to look at the patterns of athletes to determine sort of how development occurs. We have science, and then we also have anecdotal stuff, right? So we have our own evidence from our own experience. So I'm going to use a pattern of a speed skater, for example, okay? Speed skaters have incredibly large quads. Their quads are intense, right? You look at a speed skater and you know exactly the sport they're in. Like, holy crap, that's a speed skater. Quads are developed. Now, speed skaters don't just go into the rink and skate 1 day per week. They don't even go twice per week. They are speed skating repetition, 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 repetition for development, right? So, 2 arguments here. One, sitting all day, glutes get shut off. I mean, it's like the nervous system just gets lazy. So you're not activating all day long. Success leaves clues. I mean, okay, let's look at the butts on a football player, okay? Everybody watched the Super Bowl a couple weeks ago, and the first thing that you would probably notice is watching these big guys running around with these big, tight glutes. So you're going to tell me that a football player only trains 1 day per week to gain that development? No. Repetition, repetition, repetition. So we can leave that argument alone. The third thing in this is that so much of science and textbook has evolved and changed. So I'm going to use an example of picking up my very first textbook for personal training in 1996. I've been training people that long. So the breathing technique in the textbook for a squat would be to breathe in, exhale, right? Everybody knows that pattern. Breathe in, breathe out. It's all very zen. Well, it's not very helpful when you go to squat, to be totally honest with you. In fact, you're going to fall on your ass and you're going to butt wink all the way up. So if you really want to employ power through a squat, it's got to be a little bit more like breathing in, expel, push that air against your belt, push the air against your belly. And then as you come up from the squat, let it out. It is not textbook said that though. But if you powerlift or you know how to squat, you know you have to expel your air for spinal neutrality or you're dead in the water, right? So when we look at dogmatic things like textbook, we have to also look at evolution and science and how far it's come. You're not going to have any exercise physiologist who is still skilled in their trade 25 years later in 2020 give you that same breathing pattern on a big lift. They're not going to tell you that. So things do evolve and change. So when someone says you're doing it wrong, maybe, but it's time to discern that and also critically think. So we're going to critically think this and pick it apart a little bit. Now, I talked a little bit about the environment of the individual, but I'm also going to talk about the mindset of the individual with frequency of training, okay? So if I have a client who I'm going to give them 5 days a week of glute training, first off, they're not doing just glutes 5 days per week, okay? They're going to have some glute training in there, and maybe 3 of the days they're going to be performing a big lift such as a hip thrust or a glute bridge or a deadlift, okay? But they're not going to be doing that every single day. They're also going to be working other body parts in there. And you know what? Most of my clients that train this way say to me that they like it because they feel like they recover better, right? Their recovery becomes better. They're less sore all the time. And for me, that's very, very true. I personally do not like having sore legs. You want to know why? Because as soon as my quads tighten up in any way, my lower back issues come into play. So I'm going to talk about that next with posterior chain. But anyways, so when we're talking about the frequency of training, we also have to look at the individual and their mindset going into it. Do you know how to surf the curve? I talked about this in another video. But if you go into training glutes 5 days per week with like 3 exercises, maybe 4 max. Let's just say 3, okay? Maybe there's a bit of supersetting in there. It doesn't matter. The volume could be moderate, but hopefully it's not like sky high, right? Like we don't need to be in the gym for 2 hours, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. I work with natural athletes. 2 hours is too long. But if you go in there with the mindset that you're going to freaking kill it every single workout, and you don't learn to listen to your biofeedback and your environmental stressors and your body stressors in terms of your recovery, yeah, that can become a problem for you. You have to know how to surf that curve, okay? You have to know that if you hip thrusted on Monday and you're hitting PRs, when you go in on Tuesday and the first thing in your program is, say, a cable pull through, not to overload it from the get-go. Listen to your body. Listen to your recovery as well, and take your recovery days. I've seen this go awry with girls who get the program and they do the extra on top of it. Well, that, of course, is going to be more and unnecessary. So let's move on to the next thing. Obviously, your nutrition has to be on point, and you should be eating enough, but you can still do this in a bit of a caloric deficit as well. Again, it goes back to surfing the curve, listening to your biofeedback, and understanding your own individuality. But let's talk about the posterior chain and how it activates. So posterior chain is essentially the top of here all the way down to the bottom of the heels, okay? It is all the fascia, muscle, everything that consists along the backside of the body, and it is all interconnected. So when it comes to development, if the posterior chain is weak in any area, you will not have the same development as you could if your posterior chain is strong, and you are more susceptible to injury. I'm going to use myself as an example. Most people don't know this, but I used to have severe lumbar spine issues. There was a point in time when I was competing in fitness, and they told me that if I don't stop, I'm going to be in a wheelchair. That's how bad my back was, and so that's why I switched to figure. But what I figured out was I was not activating my posterior chain, and obviously the glutes are part of the posterior chain. I was very anterior focused from linear plane motion. So what does that mean? Single plane motion movements, chest press, shoulder press, lat pull down, all these things that develop as a bodybuilder. And trust me, I used to be old school bodybuilder. I started out as an old school bodybuilder, and I ended up very injured because of it. I developed a lot. I grew. I created a physique that I was very proud of, but I had trouble walking because my lumbar spine was so problematic from my posterior chain becoming so weak and my anterior chain taking the brunt. I was all quad. I was no glutes. I was no hamstring. I was all quad. So as soon as I started activating that posterior chain in every single workout, two things happened. My glutes and my hamstrings started to develop, for one thing. And the second thing that happened was my back pain went away. And I was able to jump, and I was able to do all the things that I wanted to before, within reason. But that has been a huge part of my back recovery as well. So I have all these different reasons for why I prefer that for my clients. But like I said, I have some clients that only train their glutes 1 to 2 days per week. And like I said, from an anecdotal standpoint, when I view that and I look at their programming and I look at their individuality, these are the ones that tend to also have other stressors in their life or activity levels that require a shift in that parameter. But when I have somebody that sits all day and isn't activating the posterior chain all day long, because sitting does not activate the posterior chain, you can't tell me that a little bit of banded kickbacks or anything that activates within the posterior chain is overtraining. Because if they were not sitting all day and they were moving around all day long, counting their steps, their glute medius would be activated, and so would their glutes. So repetition does mean something. Posterior chain activation is key. Frequency is individual. Environmental and internal stressors vary per individual, and we really have to get rid of dogmatic thinking. It's just like when we argue over macros versus meal plans. Listen, I don't give a rat's toots if you like to meal plan. Don't care. Meal plan away. Be a meal planner all your life. I prefer for my clients, it's a preference. Doesn't mean it's right or it's wrong. I prefer for my clients macros or intuitive eating. Obviously not intuitive eating if you're going into prep, but macros and prep. I have all my reasons I could talk about in a whole other video. I've probably done enough videos on it. Does that mean that you're wrong because you prefer a meal plan? No. It's a preference. Does it mean it's wrong because I prefer macros? No, it's a preference. But we become so ingrained in these absolutes in this industry because it keeps us comfortable, right? There's so much insecurity that comes from what we're doing. Bodybuilders are the worst, and I was one, right? You look around and you just want to feel validated that what you're doing is right. And somebody else is doing it different, and all of a sudden it's wrong because of what you were doing before. How about it's individual and it meets somewhere in the middle? How about that? Have a good day, guys. Bye.